Hi there, I'm Steve, and I did a bad thing. I watched both versions of the Justice League movie. And it hurt. It didn't actually hurt. I'm not going to do that thing that some people who make reaction or review videos do and stand here and pretend that watching a shitty movie was some kind of traumatic ordeal. I watched both cuts of Justice League. They both sucked, but neither one of them ruined my life or even my day. I'm a grown-up. According to my channel's analytics, so are most of you. Let's just skip the histrionics and talk about why I watch these movies, what makes them so bad, and why I think the Snyder Cut is not an improvement on the theatrical cut in any way. Hot take! About a movie that came out 3 weeks ago and most people already seem kind of done with. I'm ready to be done with it too, but I had to at least make a video about it. Otherwise, it's like I sat through both of those movies for nothing. And that's depressing. Stop trying to depress me. I'm doing a good enough job all by myself. So, as some of you might know, after I watched Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, I swore off the rest of the DC Extended Universe. I did break my half-assed boycott to watch Shazam, which is excellent, and Wonder Woman, which is pretty good, though I didn't see either of them in the theater and waited until they'd been available streaming for a while. I still haven't seen Aquaman, though I'm told it, like Shazam and the first Wonder Woman, is an improvement over the quality of Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, though improving on either of those is the very definition of a modest goal. Oh, and I watched Wonder Woman 1984 when it came out this past Christmas. It was fine, not as good as the first one, but not nearly as bad as its most ardent detractors said. And a couple of months ago, I also watched Birds of Prey. Really liked that one. Until about 2 weeks ago, I had never seen the Justice League movie. I skipped it when it came out in theaters, and since the reviews I read made it sound terrible, a marginal at best improvement over Zack Snyder's previous 2 DCEU films, I also didn't watch it when it started popping up on streaming services I subscribed to. I had planned to skip the Snyder Cut too, but then I talked to my best friend and podcasting partner Jason Harding, who told me he'd watched the Snyder Cut and found it bad, but not nearly as bad as he expected, an improvement over the theatrical cut of Justice League, and evidence that perhaps Zack Snyder was capable of internalizing feedback, learning and growing as a filmmaker. And I read some of the other positive-ish reviews written by critics who were definitely not among the mindless and belligerent Snyder stans who had bullied Warner Brothers into releasing the film in the first place, but don't let them distract you. This is mostly Jason's fault. So I shrugged and figured, hell with it, I'll watch both versions of Justice League and see what I think. Because the combined running time of both films is 6 hours, I decided to watch the theatrical cut on one day and the Snyder Cut the next. So I watched the theatrical cut of Justice League, and look, I find YouTube movie critics who do nothing but rant about how terrible everything is to be just as phony and performative and boring as those reactors who jump and holler like a prehistoric human seeing fire for the first time every time they watch anything. So I'm not gonna tell you that everything about the theatrical cut of Justice League is terrible. It's a bad movie, but it's not all bad. Here, I'll list the good things about it. It's only 2 hours long. I'm kidding. There are more good things than that, though that running time is definitely a mark in the plus column, especially compared to Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, and most especially compared to the Snyder Cut, but I'm not there yet. There's also a bit where Barry Allen asks Bruce Wayne what his superpower is, and Bruce deadpans, "I'm rich." That was funny. And instead of being a pouty, put-upon asshole, Superman actually shows concern for the lives of civilians, which leads to a delightful gag where the Flash pushes a pickup truck carrying a family to safety, only to turn and see Superman flying an entire apartment building out of danger. And let me see, the demise of the main villain is kind of clever, with his own parademons smelling his fear and turning on him. And there's this moment on the Kent farm where Superman smiles at Lois and he's like, "You called Mom." Only his mom doesn't actually show up for like another minute or two because he heard his mom's truck approaching with his super hearing, because that line was written by someone who thinks about Superman as something other than a guy who can punch really hard. Anyway, I think that's it for the not terrible bits. At least that's all I can remember. See, the worst thing about the theatrical cut of Justice League is that it's just so dull. The action scenes are big and loud and busy, lots of explosions, lots of generic bad guys for our heroes to dispatch, but not much in the way of, tension or drama. And pretty much everything in between those action scenes is either exposition about what the villain is trying to accomplish, or character introduction, getting the band together stuff, none of which is all that interesting. It's decently paced in the sense that everything moves along pretty fast, which I imagine would have helped to distract from the plot holes, of which I assume it had many, though I can't think of any right now because I honestly don't give a shit. But it's awkwardly structured, and it doesn't seem to quite know what to do with Superman, which admittedly is a major problem with all of Zack Snyder's DCEU movies. Superman's resurrection doesn't occur until about halfway through the film. Then, once he comes back and joins the fight with the rest of the League, he just kinda punches the bad guy a lot. And before that, because he's a little grumpy about being brought back from the dead at first, he has a fight where he just kinda punches the other members of the Justice League for a while. Other than that gag I already mentioned where he flies an apartment building to safety, and a mid-credit scene where he races the Flash to see who's faster, that's really all he does. I know it's a Justice League movie, not a Superman movie, but even so, Superman's role in the film feels almost like an afterthought. I'll say this, people who said Justice League was better than Batman v Superman, you're right. It's better than Man of Steel too. It's not a good movie, but it has a few fleeting instances of Superman actually acting like Superman. It has a couple of funny gags, and there's half an hour less of it. I am definitely in the bad but not as bad as its predecessors camp. It didn't make me angry. It didn't insult the characters as much. It mostly just bored me and got me to go, huh, once or twice. If I could distill my review of the film into a single gesture, it'd be an indifferent shrug, like, I used the same gesture to represent how I felt about the Snyder Cut, only I'd show it in slow motion, so it takes 4 fucking hours to get over with. The Snyder Cut is the result of a series of decisions that range from dubious to outright baffling, all of which are evident on the screen. You know you're in for a protracted directorial ego trip before the movie even starts when there's a title card explaining why the film you're about to watch is in the wrong aspect ratio. Okay, technically it's not in the wrong aspect ratio. Wrong is a relative term. The Snyder Cut's 4:3 aspect ratio is the right configuration for an old standard definition TV and for an Imax screen, which is why Snyder shot the film in 4:3 in the first place, so it could be played in IMAX theaters. That's not unusual. Lots of big blockbuster movies are shot with potential IMAX exhibitions in mind, but when they get released to traditional movie theaters or to home video and streaming services, they're formatted appropriately. Directors frame their shots with both formats in mind, so the movie looks good in IMAX and in a widescreen format, which I'm quite sure Zack Snyder did, both because that's standard practice and because a bunch of his footage is in the theatrical cut and it's in widescreen. Why is the Snyder Cut formatted for IMAX even though Snyder knew it was going to be released on HBO Max and watched on widescreen TVs? Because he shot it in IMAX. If he cropped the frame to widescreen, that would be cutting stuff out. And the Snyder Cut isn't about cutting stuff out. It's about putting shit back in. That's the gimmick. And Jesus Christ, the Snyder Cut of Justice League is definitely the shit back in version. It plays like an assembly cut with finished special effects. It's the same basic story as the theatrical cut, the same characters, the same plot beats. It just takes twice as long to tell. Why does it take twice as long? What's in those extra 2 hours? The added, or should I say restored material, mostly falls into 3 categories: slow motion, exposition, and extra bullshit. I'm not telling you to watch the Snyder Cut if you haven't already done so. Please don't. But if you haven't seen it, it's probably difficult to imagine just how overdone the slow motion is. Snyder uses slow-mo to illustrate the Flash's super speed, which is fine. The X-Men films beat him to it by several years, but using slow-mo to indicate super speed is a time-honored technique that dates back to the introduction of the Silver Age Flash in the comics in the 1950s. But the technique loses whatever impact it might have had because Snyder also uses slow-mo pretty much anytime anything supposedly significant happens. Even if slow motion was only used to show Flash's super speed, it would feel overdone by the end of the movie. There's only so many times you can see Ezra Miller start into that $6 million man run before it just gets fucking old. But it's not only used for the Flash, it's used for everything, because Zack Snyder belongs to the more is more school of storytelling, which is constantly trying to convince us that everything we're seeing is so important. The problem with that is, if everything is important, then nothing's important, because that's not how important works. But for as much slow motion as there is in the film, and god damn it, there's a lot, there's even more exposition. And unfortunately, a lot of it is narrated by a character who many felt was poorly served in the theatrical cut, Cyborg. A common theme voiced by many people who feel the Snyder Cut is an improvement over the theatrical version is how the Snyder Cut does right by Cyborg, and I wish that was the case. Ray Fisher, who plays Cyborg, has been very outspoken about the mistreatment he received from Joss Whedon, who came in to finish the theatrical cut after Zack Snyder left following a family tragedy. Fisher has also talked about the racism he experienced from not only Whedon, but from producers and Warner Brothers executives. I believe Ray Fisher. I think it took a lot of guts for him to speak out about the abuse he experienced, and we all owe him for helping to bring about an overdue moment of reckoning for Whedon, who has been an asshole for a long, long time. I'd love it if the Snyder Cut was a showcase for his talent and his character, and having watched it, I kinda see why some folks think that it is, but no. The main thing the Snyder Cut gives Cyborg compared to the theatrical cut is screen time. And superficially speaking, that's good. It's kind of hard to develop a character in a movie if we don't, see the character. The problem is, a significant portion of Cyborg's added screen time consists of him playing host to a lengthy montage detailing the provenance of one of the 3 MacGuffins the big scary villain is looking for. Do we need to know any of this? No, we do not. Is any of this particularly interesting? No, it is not. Does this come across as anything other than an attempt to squeeze Cyborg into the movie without giving him something of actual importance to do? No, it does not. When Cyborg isn't narrating exposition for somebody else, he's narrating exposition for himself. He has the same backstory in the Snyder Cut that he has in the theatrical cut. It's just that the Snyder Cut takes a lot longer to get through it. He also has the same character arc, starting at fuck the world. He says fuck in the Snyder Cut, so you know it's a grown-up movie for grown-ups, and progressing to I'll help save the world, I guess. I'm not going to argue that Cyborg is well used in the theatrical cut. He's not, but the Snyder Cut isn't an improvement. We see more of him, but I don't feel like I know who he is any better after the Snyder Cut than I did after the theatrical cut. I feel bad for Ray Fisher that a lot of his scenes got taken out of the theatrical cut, but honestly, if I were editing the movie, I'd have lost all of that shit too. Cyborg's the subject and the presenter of a ton of exposition, but exposition is not characterization. Unfortunately, both versions of Justice League have way more of the former than they do of the latter, and the Snyder Cut has so much exposition that not even Cyborg can handle it all. We also get a lengthy backstory montage about the history of the film's villains, narrated by Wonder Woman, who has a minimal tacked-on character arc in the theatrical cut, and no arc to speak of in the Snyder Cut. And speaking of Wonder Woman, she's the subject of some of that extra bullshit. Her first big scene in the movie is an action sequence where she stops a gang of terrorists from setting off a bomb. It plays out more or less the same in both cuts of the film, but the Snyder Cut's version, in keeping with the filmmaking philosophy that undergirds the entire film, has some extra bullshit. For example, both versions show us terrorists shooting and presumably killing people as they enter the building, while Wonder Woman stands nearby watching, superheroes hanging back and letting a few murders happen while they wait for their opportunity to make a dramatic entrance is a staple of Zack Snyder's DCEU, so nothing unusual there. But the Snyder Cut shows us a few more murders before Wonder Woman decides to actually intervene. And it also shows Wonder Woman blowing out the side of the building and presumably murdering the lead terrorist, who she could easily have just arrested at that point in front of a group of cowering children. But of course, because this is a Zack Snyder movie, the kids love that shit, and one of them is even nice enough to give Wonder Woman a prompt to add some performative feminism to the movie, when the kid says, "Can I be like you when I grow up?" And Wonder Woman replies, "You can be anything you want to be." So I can summarily execute defeated criminals in front of kids? If you want. That's girl power Snyder style. The Snyder Cut also gives Wonder Woman a theme, a leitmotif, if you will. I'll play it for you. Here it is. That's the only time I'm going to play it, which stands in contrast to Zack Snyder, who plays that music cue approximately 11 million times throughout his director's cut of Justice League, usually in conjunction with Wonder Woman doing something in slow motion, which, as I've already said, happens a lot. If you haven't seen the Snyder Cut, and again, if you haven't watched it, please don't. Imagine a Star Wars movie where the binary sunset theme plays every single time Luke Skywalker does anything. That's how ridiculously repetitive Snyder's use of that music cue is. It goes from annoying to hilarious and back to annoying about 5 or 6 times before the movie is over. I've barely even scratched the surface of the extra bullshit in the Snyder Cut. There's all the interstellar Skype calls between the villains. There's the Flash's big slow-mo scene where he rescues a woman who apparently would have turned out to be Iris West from a car crash. It's not a bad scene, but I'd rather have Flash's hero arc from the theatrical cut, where he starts out nervous before his first fight with the villains and grows more confident the more people he's able to save. There's the bit where the movie stops dead so we can listen to some villagers sing a song while Aquaman takes his shirt off and swims away. There's Superman wearing a black costume for no reason at all. Yes, I know he wears a black costume when he returns from the dead in the comics, but there are reasons given for that in those comics, reasons which are nowhere to be found in this movie, where Superman just puts on a black costume and keeps wearing it, apparently for no reason other than Zack Snyder thought it was cool because he's an edgy teenager trapped in the body of a full-grown douchebag. There's a scene between Martha Kent and Lois Lane where they have an intimate personal conversation about grief and loss, only for it to be revealed at the end that it wasn't actually Martha at all, but Martian Manhunter in disguise. Because you shouldn't be investing emotionally in any of these characters. You should be scanning for Easter eggs. That's what movies are. They aren't stories. They're treasure hunts for references you'll recognize. Martian Manhunter! Right? Speaking of Martian Manhunter, he has another completely pointless appearance in the final section of the film, which is called an epilogue, but is really just the dump site for all the remaining extra bullshit Snyder couldn't wedge into the rest of the film. We get the post-credit scene between Lex and Deathstroke that appears in slightly altered form in the theatrical cut. Snyder's version teases a Batman movie that is no longer going to happen. We get another so-called nightmare scene, which takes place in an alternate future where the bad guys have won and Superman has turned heel following the death of Lois Lane, where Batman and the Joker have a conversation that people who enjoy pulling the legs off of insects have described as the best on-screen interaction ever between those two characters. Then Bruce wakes up, because that was all just a dream, and Martian Manhunter is outside his bedroom. And he's like, "Hey, I'm here too." And Bruce is like, "Oh, okay. There are those who call me the Martian Manhunter." Got it. Anyway, just wanted to say, guess I'll catch you later. Yep. And that's the end of the movie. Bruce Wayne indifferently making sleepy small talk with Martian Manhunter is the end of the movie. I don't get it. How? Why? In what way is any of this an improvement over the theatrical cut? I've seen the arguments from people who prefer the Snyder Cut, and all I can say is that some of them suggest that we have vastly different priorities when it comes to judging the quality of movies. Like, lots of people are praising the Snyder Cut for not having those shots of Superman from reshoots where they had to digitally erase Henry Cavill's mustache. And, okay, Cavill's upper lip does look a little wobbly in some of those shots, but Christ, if that's what's bothering you after watching that movie, I don't know what to tell you. Yeah, they probably could have done a better job removing the guy's mustache, but those extra scenes, the prologue where the kids are interviewing him on their phone, the reshot finale where Superman rescues civilians and shows glimmers of personality, the mid-credits scene where he races the Flash, this version of Superman needs those desperately. I can live with some rushed, shitty CGI on the dude's face if the trade-off is some humanity getting added to the character. Jesus! People have also brought up how they appreciate the Snyder Cut getting rid of the supposedly cringe-inducing bits involving the Flash. I guess it's all a matter of taste, because the bits that they're talking about are either things I didn't care about one way or the other, or actually liked. I saw some people making a big deal about this bit where Flash saves Wonder Woman and finds himself face down on top of her. It's not a great bit. I could do without it, but in the actual film, it's a blink and you'll miss it gag that lasts for less than a second. Then Flash gets off of her at super speed and stands to the side looking awkward. A much bigger deal is the loss of Flash's aforementioned hero arc, including one of the better character interactions in either cut of the film, when Batman encourages a nervous Flash by telling him to just save one person and go from there. It's not great. It feels like the product of a late rewrite, but it at least gives us something to grab onto regarding the Flash's character. With that arc gone, the Snyder Cut version of the Flash is a socially awkward guy who runs fast, has a rule about not running too fast for reasons that are never explored, and eventually breaks that rule while speaking his motivations out loud, because that's Zack Snyder's idea of characterization. But hey, at least he's not confused about brunch anymore, right? The Theatrical Cut is not a good movie, not by any stretch of the imagination, but I'll give it this much. It's not 4 hours long. Its last half hour isn't just a bunch of out-of-context deleted scenes. It at least attempts to humanize Superman and to give character arcs to Wonder Woman and the Flash, however inadequate those arcs may have been, and it doesn't spend significant portions of its running time laying out backstory and exposition to set up for movies that aren't going to happen and would be dog shit if they did. The Theatrical Cut sucks, but it's probably the best version possible of the movie Zack Snyder shot. If anything, watching the Snyder Cut made me appreciate the job Joss Whedon did on the Theatrical Cut. It gives me no pleasure to say that because Whedon is an asshole, but I watched both versions of the movie and I thought his was obviously better. So what the hell else can I say? The action scenes are tighter, the plot, such as it is streamlined, the unnecessary extra villains are eliminated, the obnoxious stylistic excesses like the overuse of slow-mo are toned down. Whedon de-Snyderized the film as best he could, and it clearly benefited from his involvement. Fuck him for the way he treated Ray Fisher, and also for the way he treated Charisma Carpenter and apparently a bunch of other people during the production of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel back in the day. But he took an awful Zack Snyder movie and made it less awful. And of course he did. Joss Whedon is a better filmmaker than Zack Snyder. I know a lot of folks, even some who aren't among the toxic Snyder stans who regard him as a genius, think otherwise, and they're entitled to their opinions, but I don't really get it. Whedon co-wrote and produced The Cabin in the Woods, which is better than any film Snyder has ever made. He directed the first two Avengers movies, which are better than any film Snyder has ever made, with the exception of Snyder's Watchmen movie. The theatrical cut of Snyder's Watchmen movie, that is, because the director's cut sucks. Imagine that. Whedon is a terrible person, but he's a superior filmmaker to Snyder in every way, and the theatrical cut of Justice League bears that out. While I'm on the subject of terrible people, fuck Zack Snyder too. I'm tired of people saying, oh, even if you don't like his movies, he seems like a good guy. Does he? I'm not arguing with people who say that he's easy to get along with, that he might be much more pleasant to work with on set than a dickhead like Whedon, that he's fun to hang out with. That all may be true. I don't know. I've never met him. I've just watched his films that are filled with fascist imagery and themes. Does that sound like a good guy? Films that are filled with sumptuously photographed graphic violence. Does that sound like a good guy? Films that are filled with misogyny and denigration of women and glorification of rape. Does that sound like a good guy? Films that have attracted a fan base of angry, entitled, toxic young men who relentlessly troll and bully and harass anyone who offends them. A fan base, by the way, that Snyder himself has done almost nothing to repudiate and has in fact embraced and encouraged. Does that sound like a good guy? He's a 55-year-old man whose dream project is an adaptation of a fucking Ayn Rand novel, but yeah, I'm sure he's a great dude. And that brings me to the final point I want to make, which is that the Snyder Cut isn't just worse than the theatrical cut because it's a bad movie. It's worse for what it represents. The toxic fandom of a shitty director threw a massive tantrum, and a major Hollywood studio let them have their way. Warner Brothers spent an additional $70 million to complete the Snyder Cut, which, contrary to the narrative of said toxic fanbase, did not exist in anything like an exhibitable form prior to that. That's not a good precedent to set, regardless of the quality of the film in question. But it's not just the toxic fans and the studio who ought to be ashamed of themselves. It's everyone else who went along with them and helped to make the release of the Snyder Cut a cultural event. And I include myself in that. I was already an HBO Max subscriber, so at least I can say that I didn't buy the service to watch the Snyder Cut, but I did watch it. I did help to get the numbers up, even if only a tiny bit. I didn't have to. I chose to. I chose to watch the theatrical cut too. I chose to support the work of not one, but two toxic creators, and so did a lot of us. And I'm not saying we need to march through the streets self-flagellating over it. It's not the first time I ever knowingly watched a shitty movie made by a shitty person. It's not a mortal sin. But maybe I should be more thoughtful about this sort of thing from now on. Maybe I should do more to support lesser-known writers and filmmakers, creators who lack the baggage of Whedon and Snyder, but who also lack the profile. Maybe I should seek out more of their work and stop taking hours out of my life to watch movies produced and directed by mediocre men who stand with armies of angry trolls at their backs. Moving forward, hopefully Warner Brothers has turned a corner with its live-action DC Comics films. Both of last year's DCEU releases, Birds of Prey and Wonder Woman 1984, were much better than the Zack Snyder-helmed entries in the franchise. The trailer for James Gunn's Suicide Squad movie looks good. My fingers are crossed for Matt Reeves' Batman movie, which technically isn't going to be part of the DCEU, even better. The Superman film, currently being developed by J.J. Abrams and Ta-Nehisi Coates, reportedly centering on a black Superman, is potentially very exciting, both for its concept and for the talent of those involved. The upcoming Flash movie, which will be a part of the DCEU, also sounds fun, with its focus on one of the more likable characters from Justice League and its plot based on the Flashpoint story from the comics, introducing the concept of the multiverse. To the big screen, anyway. The Arrowverse shows on the CW have been playing with parallel Earths for years now and having a great old time doing it. They also have a better Superman. A way better Superman than the DCEU version. A Superman that seems like he's being written by people who don't hate the character. But I digress. So yeah. Despite years of obnoxiously terrible movies and aggressively toxic fans, there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is life after the Snyderverse. And of course there is. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash. These are some of the most versatile and durable characters in all of superhero comics, in all of fiction. Not even years of gloomy, mediocre movies directed by a shallow cinematic edgelord can keep them down for long. There will always be new stories and new storytellers to keep them living, breathing, and evolving. Zack Snyder can't kill DC's greatest heroes, and neither can his very loud and very shitty fans. Even so, I do think it's well past time that we, fans, critics, commentators, studio executives, all of us, stop giving him and them so much oxygen.